on 2 decades now, the need of our government to change the laws and swing the pendulum back a little bit back to the side of working people. Because I don't know if you've noticed the pendulum way to the side of the employer. I mean, we're back to they're in complete control. You look at the fact that this Amazon election, Amazon spent $200 million fighting against their workers and arguing that we're doing it for your benefit because we care about you. They spent $200 million because they didn't want to see their employees get ripped off. They didn't want the union ripping off their employees because they're too busy ripping off their employees. And they ran that campaign, do it without dues. And I say all the time, the reality is whether you're in a union or not, you're paying dues. If you're in a union, you're paying dues to get better wages, hours, and conditions. If you're not in a union, you're paying dues through lower wages, less benefits, and unsafe working conditions. It's that simple. This isn't a very difficult proposition to figure out. But for me, the PRO Act is important because it undoes a lot of the control that employers have. It puts real penalties in place where we've needed them for a while. I was a tepid supporter of the Employee Free Choice Act because I believed it didn't go anywhere far enough. But back when George Miller, California Democrat, proposed it with Teddy Kennedy, I said, okay, this is something. It's moving in the right direction. It was something that they actually thought George W. Bush would sign. He didn't. Thank you, Arlen Specter, because Specter boogered it all up. But it was something that they thought he would sign. It tripled penalties for unjustly firing someone, because currently you can fire someone and, after a year or 2 or 3 down the road, the NLRB puts them back to work. Oh, sorry, slap on the wrist. We won't promise not to do it again. Post a notice. And then all that the employee gets is whatever back wages that they would have earned in employment minus whatever they did actually earn. So if you found a job making the exact amount of money that you were making before, no harm, no foul. It doesn't cost the employer a dime to fire you. And what employers know is you're going to do that because you can't support yourself without a job. And they know this. And in fact, retaliation happens, in 40% of cases, employers do retaliate. Overwhelming number of them, fire people as a chilling effect. The PRO Act would stop that and put real penalties in place. Now, the Employee Free Choice Act, it was triple. So if you got fired and you got another job, let's say you made even more money, the penalties would be 3 times whatever you lost. That's what you would get. And, the companies would then start to think twice because now it's some pennies. They're going to have to pay something. Now, granted, Amazon spent $200 million. They have fired people across the country unjustly. They don't care about money. For them, it's about power and control and this illusion that they care about their workforce, that, well, we just don't want to see them get ripped off by those evil, greedy unions. Is laughable. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's quite laughable. But for me, the PRO Act does a bunch of things that we need to get done, and it does it in one piece of legislation. Like I said, it puts real penalties in place when employers retaliate. It stops employers from being able to delay elections, as we saw in this Amazon thing. They drew this out. It stops them from obstructing the contract, because getting that first contract is almost as well, in a lot of cases, is harder than winning the election. Because if there's a company that says we're just not going to do it, you can negotiate all day long. There's no mechanism to impose a contract. It would also end forced attendance to these captive audience meetings. And we'll talk a little bit about these as we go on. It would end right to work as we know it. It would end strike replacement. That would be a thing of the past. And misclassification would be a thing of the past. They couldn't then go, these these aren't really our workers. They're independent contractors, so they can't vote. No, if they're doing your job, they're considered workers. But for me, there's a bunch of this that's been stuff of the past, like the strike replacement, for instance. That was something that I had hoped and voted for Bill Clinton twice on, hoping that he would get pushed through. It didn't happen. This idea that you can only go on strike and not be replaced if it's an unfair labor practice. Like if they do fire somebody unjustly, then you can maybe go on strike if the board decides that it was an unfair labor practice. And that's a lot of if and well, who knows? My view is nobody wants to go on strike. Nobody. But sometimes it's the last arrow in the quiver. Sometimes you got to do it. Sometimes things have broken down so badly that that's what shocks the system and brings people back to negotiating. It's something that has to be there. This idea that lockouts have become more prevalent than strikes is a problem, because employers are going, well, fine, to the curb with you, because we can replace you. And then bringing scabs across and having armies of policemen to protect the scabs who are crossing someone's picket lines. Just incredible to me. And I go back to it. And, I think anytime I talk about scabs, I think about my grandfather, who, when my mother passed, I moved in with my grandparents. And there was a guy who, a catty corner to us where their house was. And my grandfather said, I don't care what you do, but you don't go over to that house. You don't play with their grandkids. You don't go anywhere near that. I'll whoop your behind if I see you go over there. And I didn't. It was I don't want to get whipped. So a number of years later, I asked him. I said, what was that all about? What was it that caused that? And he said, back during the 50s, the guy crossed a railroad picket line, late 40s, early 50s, crossed a railroad picket line, and had been ostracized from society pretty much the entire time because nobody ever went over there. He was a scab till the day he died. We need to bring back that kind of working class mentality. You do not scab on someone's job. You stay out of that. I've used the analogy of a marriage that's going through a rough patch. When workers go on strike, them and the employer, they're having a tough relationship, having a little tough time. And I got to use this analogy on a policeman back before Christmas. I was at a strike line with a group of workers, and a cop came up because someone had called the police. And he wanted to know what was going on, so I had to explain to him what a strike was because he didn't know. And I said, well, think about it this way. Think about you and your wife are having some problems. And your wife decides, I'm gonna go grab a bag and I'm going to my mother's house. And this is how I told him this. I said, now imagine your wife, she's packed a bag, she's gone to your mother-in-law's house. You guys aren't really talking. You're kind of angry at each other. She's ticked at you. You're ticked she left. So you get the bright idea, hey, I'm going to put on my Sunday best. I'm going to buy a thing of roses. I'm going to go knock on the door, and I'm going to woo her back. And this is where I'm glad I'm not on terrestrial radio, because I can tell this exactly the way I told it to the cop. I said, now imagine you're walking up the front yard. You open up the gate to the picket fence. And there I am nailing your wife on the porch. How are you going to respond? And he had no answer. I go, I'm serious. She's screaming and carrying on, and she's having a high old time. How are you going to respond? He goes, well, I wouldn't like it. I go, that's exactly what happens when one of these scabs cross the picket line. These guys, this is their job. These guys are cheating. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants that. How do you think they're going to respond? And he goes, I guess I kind of see your point. I go, no, you don't kind of see my point. You see my point. Keep the scabs out of this. So this idea that you can permanently replace people has to stop. And I'm glad that that's in this. It also puts the offensive lockouts out of business. Which means, the employer goes, well, you're not going to take what we want. I'm kicking you to the curb. That stuff ends. It ends worker misclassification. I know there's a lot of people who think they want to be, I'm going to be my own boss. This isn't what we're talking about. You want to be your own boss? You go on ahead. You put your shingle out. You do your thing. But at the end of the day, you've got to control your own destiny. You've got to control your own work. You've got to be responsible for your own time and all that stuff. And it's got to be something that's outside the scope of the employer's daily business. We're not going to have a bunch of warehouse workers all considered independent contractors. Sorry, not going to happen. You're not going to have 300 independent contractors in that warehouse. Some have tried this, and we've done it with the trucking industry. You have to drive the truck with the company's name on it. You got to wear the company's uniform. You got to be where we tell you, when we tell you, how you tell you, all of that stuff. But you are an independent contractor. Nonsense. You're an employee. You're an employee who's being cheated, and cheated mightily, because you're the one who's responsible for all of the repair costs, all the downtime, all the insurance, all the fuel, all the costs, all the risk. It's got to stop. And I think this is a step in the right direction. Also, going to remove the limitations on secondary strikes and boycotts. This is something that I think we desperately need, where it builds working class solidarity and makes employers come to the table and negotiate in good faith. At the end of the day, all of this stuff is about getting the best deal workers can possibly get. The best wages you can get for your time, the best benefits you can get for your time, the best conditions you can get to spend your time. At the end of the day, I've never bought anything with money. I've bought it with bits and pieces of my life. And we've got to think about it in those terms. The wages that we earn is a trade-off for the hours that we could have been doing something else. So we want to get the best we can. They would also end captive audience meetings. Like I said, what we saw from the Amazon campaign was what you see in most union-busting campaigns. They bring people in, sequester them in a room, and then browbeat them about how bad the union is, how greedy the union is. They only want your dues dollars because it's only about the money. And this question has come up to me. Well, it is about money, and it is. It is about money. Dues are how unions exist. Dues are how the union negotiates a contract. Attorneys cost money. Negotiators cost money. People to negotiate and to enforce the contract cost money. No one disputes that. But if you're going to go, all you do is you want my money and I get nothing in return, there's a problem there, because that's not true. It's not even remotely true. I wish I could take every dime that I have and get the kind of return on investment that I get from my dues dollars. The 2.5 hours a month that I give in dues dollars to ensure that I make, higher wages, 18 to 30%, depending on your industry, and higher wages. Better health care coverage. I've got the kind of health care coverage that Congress people are envious of. Last year when I had my hip replaced, it cost me $120 out of pocket. That's it. And the thing is, I want that for everybody. And there's a way forward to that. You join the union. You collectively bargain. That simple. The PRO Act also does a couple other things. Back at the end of the Trump term, the NLRB decided the Johnson Controls case, which would allow a company to say 90 days before the end of a contract, we don't believe the union has majority support, and just withdraw union recognition altogether. That would end this, something that desperately needs to happen, because I fully expect this to be a problem going forward if it's not. Getting that first contract. It's one thing to go, we're worried about them pulling out at the end. It's getting that first contract. And what I liked about the Employee Free Choice Act is it put absolute time frames in place. This does this as well. For instance, as soon as the election's over, you got 10 days to have a written document saying this is when we're going to begin bargaining. If you don't reach an agreement in 90 days, you file for mediation. After, I think, if you can't reach an agreement in mediation in 30 days, you then can set up an arbitrators panel. And you pick a person from the company, a person from the union, and a person that both people, a mediator that somebody they both agree with. So the three of them then impose a contract within 120 days. Eventually, there shall be a contract. And that contract will be enforced for 2 years, regardless. Now, I'm against the idea of imposing contracts. I like the fact that they've put it in here that one will be imposed upon you, because nobody wants to be dictated to. Nobody wants their contract imposed on them. So this is the hey, we better get our what together, and we better negotiate something. So I'm glad to see that in there as well. The other thing that I'm thrilled that's in it is the end of forced arbitration clauses. This is again another one of those Trump era decisions, the Epic System cases, that my aunt went through this. She worked for a company for like 20 years, and they walked in one day and they said, sign this or go, or you're fired. And it was her basically signing her rights away, that if they were to sexually harass her or age discrimination or anything that would happen in her course of employment, that she would not be able to sue them. She would not be able to pursue a class action lawsuit against them. She would have to go to an arbitrator. She'd have to go through arbitration. Oddly enough, usually picked by the company. And she called me, and I still remember. She called me. She goes, have you seen this? And I said, yeah. I said, I have, sadly. And if you're not in a union, you got to sign it. If you're in a union, you have to negotiate for it, of which no union would agree to have their members sign their rights away. But I told her, you got two choices. You can sign it, or you can leave, because the law is what it is now. And this is how bad things have gotten. There's also some transparency stuff in there. There's a bunch of stuff to try and right the wrongs that have happened over the years. I mean, the fact that during the Obama years, they wanted to post that you have the right to organize, and the right lost their flipping mind. It's your right under the law, and they lost their mind. I mean, it was really quite remarkable. A couple other things that are in there that I think are important, just real quick. The fact that you can hold the elections off-site. It doesn't have to be on the employer's turf, so they can't put a camera at the box, right there where everyone's watching who's voting, and they know who you are, kind of like Amazon did. So to me, that's important, to be able to cast your ballot in a neutral site. There's a bunch of other little things, but for me, that's kind of the big stuff. It's kind of the big stuff of saying, return the rights back to the workers and not to the employer. Return the rights to the people who should be allowed to vote to join and form a union. Because I think when people have that opportunity and they really understand the power that comes with that, they're going to do it. And that's why employers are freaked out, because what they're selling ain't working. Now, for me, the other part of this, and this is where, when I was thinking about talking about this today, I've gotten into this mindset that most people are not like me. I negotiate everything. Everything I think is up for negotiation. Everything is we can dicker over. A lot of people just take what they get. And I can't imagine that. And we've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to, in the workplace, basically just take what we get. And what's interesting is the more I work with public sector workers, the more they're like, well, I get, this is what I get. And I'm going, no, you have the ability to collectively bargain. You have the ability of everyone to come together and have a say, especially you in the public sector. You really have some power because the laws are so much easier to organize. Now, granted, because of Trump's Supreme Court and the Janus decision, it's harder to get people to join because, hey, they think they get everything for free. And this is where the money comes in. I just had this conversation where, I talk about the contract that I have and that I live under. And as I've said, I got two books on my nightstand, the Bible and my contract. One's going to save my soul and this one's going to save my ass. And, this person was like, well, I don't need that because I'm never going to get into trouble. And I'm going, it's not about getting in trouble. It's not about protecting anyone. It's not about protecting the if you think it protects the lazy or any of that. It's not about that. It's about how do you get the best for your job? How do you get the best wages? How do you get the best benefits? How do you get the best working conditions? How do you get a fair life-work balance? How do you get the things that we want? How do you get that? Do we believe that there's a benevolent employer out there who's going to go, oh, here, I bestow upon you these wonders because you're such a wonderful person and we can't possibly do without you. No, it's not that at all. I've been talking to new members and I'm going, this contract is generations in the making. Hundreds of people before you, even thousands of people before you, funded its organization, its negotiation, and its enforcement. That's what your dues dollars goes for. Your dues dollars goes to protecting your interests. Every CEO in this country's got a contract. Why doesn't every worker? And it's one of those things where you go, you may not know what you've got until it's gone. And I've been having conversations with different people about, how do you deal with the public sector in the post-Janus world where, maybe, half the people are paying dues and half the people are going, hey, I get great benefits and all this stuff because you guys are doing all this stuff. I get it for free. I don't have to pay for it. What happens at that moment of critical mass? And this is where I've had conversations with people about deciding, what do you do? Once you get to that critical mass point where it's no longer economically viable to enforce and to negotiate and to have this contract, what do? Do the unions just go, sorry, we can't afford to do it anymore? And then what you were getting for free literally goes away. All of it. Because as I was explaining to somebody, I go, every line in this contract, somebody negotiated. Every word was painstakingly decided upon to protect your rights. That's power. And if we could get society to understand that, I think it'd be a much better place. So for those who have asked, and I appreciate the questions, why do I believe every worker should have a contract? Why every worker should be in a union? It's all about your best economic interests. If you're okay with I'll take what I get, if you're okay, you get what you get and don't throw a fit like we tell my kids, if you're okay with that, you keep going on the way you're going. Because I said a minute ago, everybody pays dues one way or another. You're either going to pay them to the union to fight for better wages, hours, and conditions, or you're going to pay them through diminished opportunity and diminished wages and worse conditions. It's going to happen. There is no question about that. It's just a matter if you realize it or not. So that's my spiel for today. We'll be back here in 2 weeks. I know the weather was beautiful, so we did not get questions through our ThinkSpot page. If you want to email me directly, you can email me at rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally, and I use them here on the program or on these Q&As here on ThinkSpot. We'll be back in 2 weeks. If you've got questions, we'd love to hear them. But until then, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you back here next time.